Section 3 of the Fables of Pilpay. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Fables of Pilpay by Anonymous, translated by Abdullah Ibn al-Muqaffa and Joseph Harris. Chapter 1. Fortune Favors the Bold. The Story of Dabschelm and Pilpay. On the banks of Indus, towards the sea-coast, and over a vast extent of country thereabouts, there reigned a prince, whose ministers, persons of justice, wisdom, and understanding, by their counsels rendered the subjects happy, and always successfully brought to pass the just designs of the sovereign. This excellent prince was an enemy of oppression, nor could the wicked ever gain their ends in his dominions. He was called Dabschelm, a name most proper for such a prince, as signifying in their language a great king. His puissance was such that he undertook none but extraordinary enterprises, and those always just, and on honest and honorable grounds. To relieve the distressed or punish the proud oppressor were the only occasions of his entering on war. His army was composed of 10,000 elephants. Valiant and experienced soldiers he had about him in great numbers, and his treasures were kept full to support them. This rendered him formidable to his enemies, and procured the repose of his people, of whom he took a particular care, hearing their complaints and differences, composing their quarrels, and making himself the arbitrator of their disputes, without any respect to his greatness or superior rank. He never forsook the interests of his people, but referred their affairs, when of too long and intricate a nature to come under his own cognizance, to the debates and decisions of men of justice and equity. When he had taken this good order for the government of his dominions, he lived in tranquillity, and spent his days with happiness and content. It happened that this wise and glorious monarch, one day, when he had been for a long time entertained with divers discourses upon the several sciences, and the use they and the principles of equity and honor must be of in the well-governing a people, laid himself down upon his bed to give some relaxation to his mind, which he had no sooner done, but he saw in a dream a figure full of light and majesty, which, approaching toward him with a look of benevolence and the highest favor, spoke in the following manner: "You have done this day as a good prince ought to do, and you shall be rewarded for it. Tomorrow by break of day get on horseback, and ride toward the east, where you shall find an inestimable treasure, by the means of which you shall, as you deserve, exceed in glory and honor all other men." Immediately the figure disappeared, and Dabschelm, awaking with a heart full of joy and gratitude, mounted one of his best horses and rode directly eastward. He passed in his way through several inhabited places, but at length arrived in a desert, where, viewing the country and casting his eyes on every side to discover his expected happiness, he perceived at a little distance before him a mountain that reached above the clouds, at the foot of which he spied a cave, obscure, dark, and black within, as the hearts of wicked men. Without it he saw sitting a man whose aspect sufficiently showed the austerity of his life. The king had a great desire to ride up to him, when the old man, understanding his intention, came forward, and breaking silence, addressed himself to the monarch in these words: "Sir," said he, "though my small cottage be nothing like to your magnificent palace, yet it is an ancient custom for kings, out of their goodness, to come and visit the poor. The looks of great men cast down upon the mean augment their own grandeur. I joy to see the greatest and the wisest monarch in the East not forget this ancient custom. And, O supreme and magnificent prince, let it not raise a blush in thee to cast thy royal looks on my low estate, when thou rememberest that Solomon, in the midst of all his glory and magnificence, vouchsafed to cast his eyes upon the little ants." Dabschelm was pleased with the old man's civility, and alighted from his horse to discourse with him. After he had talked to him of divers things, he was going to take his leave. The venerable sage surprised him with the following words. "Sir," said he, "it is not for a poor man as I am to offer any refreshment to so great a prince as you. But permit me to tell you that I have a present, if your majesty pleases to accept it, which has descended to me from father to son, and which is appointed for you. It is a treasure which I have here by me, though I know not myself exactly the place where it now lies. But if your majesty thinks it worth your acceptance, command your servants to seek for it." Dabschelm, hearing these words, recounted his dream to the good old man, who rejoiced extremely to find that his intentions in bestowing his treasure were conformable to the will of the supreme power by whom he was entrusted with it. The king now commanded his servants to search for the treasure round about the cave, and in a little time they discovered it, and brought before the king a vast number of chests and coffers full of gold, silver, and jewels. Among the rest there was one chest of a smaller size than the others, which was bound about with several bars of iron, and fastened with a multitude of padlocks, the keys of which were not to be found, notwithstanding all the care and diligence that were used to seek them. This highly increased the monarch's curiosity. "There must be something," said he, "in this little casket, much more precious than jewels, since it is so strongly and carefully barred and locked." A smith was now procured, and the casket being broken open, there was found within it another small trunk of gold, set all over with precious stones, and within that yet another lesser box. This the king ordered to be delivered into his own hands. When this little box was opened, he found therein a piece of white satin, upon which were written some lines in the Syriac language. Dabschelm was astonished at the accident, and in great perplexity to know what the words might signify. Some said it was the will of the owner of the treasure, and others that it was a talisman or some charm for the preservation of it. After everyone had delivered his opinion, it was the king's pleasure that inquiry should be made for some person who was able to interpret the meaning of the lines. And after long search a person was found, who perfectly understood all the Oriental languages, who, when he had looked over it, said to the king, "Sir, this writing is to a prince, indeed an inestimable treasure. It contains the rules, admonitions, and instructions of a great king for the well-governing a people, and how nearly it particularly concerns yourself, O king. Permit me to show by reading to you what it contains." The king, bidding him read aloud, he then began as follows. "The writing of the great King Hushek, left with his treasures. I, King Hushek, have disposed of this treasure for the use of the great King Dabschelm, understanding by a visionary revelation him to be the person for whom it is designed, and among the precious stones I have concealed this, my last will and testament, by way of instruction to him, to let him know that it is not for men of reason and understanding to be dazzled with the luster of glittering treasures. Riches are but borrowed conveniences, and are to be repaid to our successors. The pleasures of this world are charming, but they are not eternal. This testament is a thing of much more real use than all these treasures. It is an abridgment of the good rules proper to regulate the conduct of kings, and he must be a wise prince who regulates his conduct by these instructions, which are in number of 14. 1. That he never discard his domestic servants at the solicitation of other persons. For he that is near the person of a king will never want some who will be envious and jealous of his happiness, and when they see that the king has any affection for him, will not cease by 1,000 calumnies, if it can be done, to render him odious to his master. 2. That he never suffer in his presence flatterers nor railers, for these people are always seeking occasions of disturbance. It is better to exterminate such people from the earth than to let them be a trouble to human society. 3. That he always preserve his ministers and grandees, if it be possible, in a right understanding with one another, to the end that they may unanimously labor for the good and welfare of the state. 4. That he never trust to the submissions of his enemies. The more affection they testify and the louder protestations they make of their services, the more artifices and villainies are to be mistrusted in them. There is no relying upon the friendship of an enemy. He is to be shunned when he approaches with the countenance of a friend, as the siren who puts on charms but with an intent to destroy. 5. When a man has once acquired what he has diligently sought after, let him preserve it carefully, for we have not every day the same opportunity to gain what we desire. And when we have not preserved what we have once acquired, we have nothing left us but the vexation of having lost it. We cannot fetch the arrow back which we have once let fly, though we should eat our fingers for madness. 6. That we never ought to be too hasty in business, but on the other side, before we put any enterprise into execution, it behooveth us to weigh and examine what we are going to do. Things done in haste and with a precipitate rashness come frequently to a mischievous conclusion. He repents in vain who cannot recall what he has done amiss. 7. That a man never despise good counsel and prudence. If there be a necessity for him to make peace with his enemies in order to deliver himself out of their hands, let him do it without delay. 8. To avoid the company of dissemblers, and never to hearken to their smooth speeches, for as in their bosoms they carry nothing but the plants of enmity, they can never bring forth the fruits of friendship. 9. To be merciful. Never let a monarch inflict a punishment on his subjects or servants for faults committed through infirmity. For a merciful prince upon earth is as an angel in heaven. We ought to consider the weakness of men, and in charity and goodness to conceal their defects. Subjects have always committed faults, and kings have always pardoned them, when they have only committed the faults which the common frailties of human nature have betrayed them into. 10. Not to procure the harm or injury of any person. On the other hand, we ought to do our neighbor all the good we can. If you do good, good will be done to you. But if you do evil, the same will be measured back to you again. 11. That a king seek not after anything that may be below his dignity, or a subject that is contrary to his genius or nature. There are many persons who let alone their own affairs to intrude themselves into other people's business, and at last do nothing at all. The crow would needs learn to fly like the partridge. It was a way of flying which he could never attain, and in attempting to learn it, he forgot his own. 12. To be of a mild and affable temper. Mildness in society is like salt in our food. As salt seasons and gives a relish to all meat, the other gives content to everybody. The sword of steel is not so sharp as the sword of mildness. It vanquishes even invincible armies. 13. For a king to seek out faithful ministers, and never to admit into his service or counsels knaves and deceivers. By wise and honest ministers the kingdom will be kept safe, and the king's secrets will never be revealed. 14. Never to be disturbed at the accidents of the world. A man of resolution and true courage suffers all adversities with a settled fortitude, and relies upon the providence of heaven, while a fool minds nothing but his pastime and his pleasure. There are several fables of excellent instruction founded on every one of these heads, which if the king will hear, he must go to the mountain Serantib, a vast mountain famous for the residence of many of the learned men of the East, which was the mansion of our fathers, and there all the histories composed to illustrate and explain these admonitions will be related to him, and every question that can come into his heart to ask concerning the making his people happy will be answered as from an oracle of heaven. When the learned man had done reading, Dabschelm caught him in his arms and eagerly embraced him, and having received back again the piece of satin, which he took with the most profound respect, he tied it about his arm, saying at the same time, I was promised indeed a worldly treasure, but beside I have found a treasure of secrets. Heaven has favored me with plenty of its blessings, for which my grateful soul now offers its most humble adorations and praises." Having said this, he ordered the gold and silver to be distributed to the poor, and returned to his palace, where all that night he did nothing but ruminate upon the journey which he was to make to Serendib. The next morning, by sunrise, Dabschelm sent for 2 of his principal ministers, in whom he had great confidence. To these he discovered his dream, and what had afterwards befallen him, and told them he had a most earnest inclination to make a journey to Serendib. "I have for a long time," said he, "taken this course to advise with my council before I undertook any of my enterprises, and in this also am I willing to refer myself to your judgments. And now I have told you my intentions and the reason of them, I conjure you by your honours and the esteem I have for you, to tell me what you think, as a prince who knows his duty to be the care of his subjects, I ought to do on this occasion." The 2 ministers desired the remainder of the day and the night following to consider the whole matter, that they might not without due deliberation give their answer in a thing of so high concernment. Dabschelm granted their request, and the next day they came to wait upon the king, and every one being seated in their places, so soon as the monarch made them the sign to speak, the Grand Vizier fell upon his knees and thus began: "Sir, in my opinion, this journey is like to be more painful than profitable. Your Majesty is to consider that the person who undertakes long journeys renounces at the same time his repose, and to this your Majesty is not ignorant of the dangers and hazards to which the roads are subject. It is not for a person of discretion to change his quiet and ease for labour and disturbance. Permit me on this occasion to call to your Majesty's remembrance the fable of the pigeon that would needs be a traveller, and the dangers which he met with." End of section 3. Read by Sandra in Montreal, 2021.